So, good morning, everyone. My name is Nikki Oliver, and I'm the Deputy Commissioner at the Minnesota Office of Higher Education. Due to our Wednesday Office of Education Public Engagement call, the purpose of these calls is to engage with diverse communities in order to identify barriers in post-secondary education. The Office of Higher Education is committed to working with a diverse community to provide guidance and equitable access to information that lead to the pursuit of post-secondary education and or training for all Minnesotans. So before I share the discussion topic with you, I wanted to take this time to acknowledge our remarkable public engagement team who have gone above and beyond to ensure that these calls are ran smoothly. The public engagement team takes care of all of our logistics. They identify the relevant discussion topics. They invite the appropriate guest panelists, which have included students, faculty, nonprofit organizations, state agencies, commissioners, subject matter experts, as well as other entities. They have been very deliberate and intentional in their engagement with the community. The team actively solicits questions and feedback from the community and do an excellent job with responding in a timely manner. So on behalf of senior leadership, I would like to thank you for all that you do. You rock. So I just want to talk a little bit about the events from past several months which have changed our work environments and lives. We have the COVID-19 pandemic going on. A lot of folks are working from home. We have the civic unrest. We have the economic issues going on. But I feel like now it's really important that we grasp on to reasons to celebrate to help us get through this challenging time. And anybody who knows me knows I like to celebrate. So today I'm celebrating Women's Equality Day. So Governor Walz has proclaimed today, August 26th, as Women's Equality Day to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the United States ratification of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. August 26th represents the culmination of 72-year campaign to extend the right to vote for women in the United States and serves as an ongoing symbol of a right for equal rights. So I just want to put that out there and put a plug into our next election date, which is November 3rd. And I encourage everyone on this call to make sure that to use your civil rights and go out and vote, and also encourage others to vote. And you can vote early if you're concerned about in-person voting. You can vote early. You can vote by mail. So there are several ways that you can just vote in and make it count. So I just wanted to put that plug in. So for today's call, we will recap highlights from our previous public engagement calls and allow time for an open dialogue with the community. So I am thrilled to have the following panelists speak this week. We have Nikki Oliver. She's the Grants and Government Relations Manager and for OHE, the Office of Higher Education. And Nikki will review the information that was shared on one of our calls around financial aid opportunities and talk a little bit about the barriers and concerns that we've learned from students, and also talk about the guidance for fall school openings, which was provided by Penn State. We also have on our panel today Marcio Thompson. Marcio serves as our External Relations Manager, and he will recap the conversation that we had on a previous call around race and equity in higher education. And last, we have Klima. Kat is our Outreach and Communication Coordinator, and she will recap the guidance around returning to campus safely. And this was a really informative call. We had the Department of Health on that call. So she will recap some of the guidance that was provided to us by the Department of Health. So just a reminder for the public engagement calls, they're designed to be interactive. So we encourage you to use the chat box if you have comments, questions, or feedback. Please use the chat box, and we will respond accordingly. So with that, we'll turn it over to our first panelist, Nikki Oliver.
Good morning, everyone. As Deputy Commissioner Sullivan said, my name is Nikki Oliver. I'm the Manager of Grants and Government Relations for the Office of Higher Education. So I will be kind of highlighting some things that were discussed on previous calls related to some of the services our agency provides as it relates to financial aid and financial aid services. And then I'm not necessarily going to talk about guidelines that Minnesota has for returning to campus, but more so some of the highlighted points about how or tips that were provided about how to ensure students are successful when they return to campus or as school opens back up during this pandemic and everything else that's going on in community. I'm not going to go into extreme detail. As the Deputy Commissioner also mentioned, we're hoping to have more of a dialogue with you all on this call and opening it up for a public comment, conversation, and questions. We're not necessarily going to be able to answer all questions on the call. We will be sure to note those and be sure we get the proper folks that do have the answers should we not have answers, and circle back with you all on those. We had a call that was specifically consisting of financial aid and the barriers of accessing those. And to start us off, I just wanted to mention some of the programs that our agency offers and also encourage you all and students and parents and administrators and school counselors and whomever else is on the call that has direct contact with students and stakeholders to actually go on and access the Office of Higher Education's website, where you can find a myriad of information on all of these programs, including numerous reports that also offer suggestions on how to better serve students in different areas. One of our largest programs, largest number of students served, as well as a significant part of our state budget, is the Minnesota State Grant. If you're a student that is eligible for the Minnesota State Grant, you do get it by completing the FAFSA, and it's an automatic situation where it will be applied or offered to you. Another program that I think was mentioned that I feel was really important for individuals to know about was the Minnesota Post-Secondary Child Care Grant. And I would like to talk a little bit about barriers when I mention this program. So this program helps low to moderate income students pay for child care as a college student, and the max award for the last academic year was $5,500 per child per term if the student was enrolled full-time. One of the things that we're doing, one of the barriers that was made clear to us, not just on that call but other calls, by students was not knowing that these resources existed, and also the fact that there are barriers to accessing these, whether it's related to policy or just how the programs are administered and communicated to students. So, as a call to action, something our agency is currently working on is reassessing the policies to try to eliminate some of those policy barriers and working with the institutions that administer these programs to also eliminate barriers that may be happening there. So I just wanted to mention that's something that we're working on. Another program we have in our office is the Minnesota Scholarship Program, the Minnesota Indian Scholarship Program. And it's for students who are 1/4 American Indian, and they have to have proof of that, and they get it by filling out the FAFSA or DMAC Another instance of where we're trying to eliminate barriers is we're looking into the policy for eligibility for that program and trying to reassess it and looking at it, working with the stakeholders and communities, the American Indian community. Another program is the Minnesota Teacher Candidate Grant. We also have the Minnesota Teacher Shortage Loan Forgiveness Program as well, which pays back loans for teachers that fall into that work in a shortage area, and then there's a carve-out for teachers from specific racial and ethnic groups. But the Teacher Candidate Grant is for students currently enrolled in teacher prep programs. Those are some teacher-related programs that our office offers. We also have the self-loan program, and this is a state loan program, and we are able to offer lower interest rate loans to students, and then we also newly created the refi program. So if you have loans from private lenders and you want to consolidate or refinance those into a lower interest rate loan, we do have that as well. We do provide information to individuals for all of our programs, especially the ones that are quote-unquote student loan forgiveness or loan refinancing, about the best options for your loan type. We know that sometimes consolidating federal loans is probably sometimes not the best option for you, and so we try to communicate that, and I think information about those options are also on the websites for the various programs. So we also have an emergency assistance program. That program, we issue out funds to institutions that had to apply via a competitive grant process to offer short-term emergency grants to students and facing short-term emergencies. And that a lot of times those short-term, or what we are calling short-term emergencies, are a sign of sometimes a bigger issue. So the way we organize the program is that these institutions that applied had to collaborate across departments within their school. So the school counselor and the financial aid advisor and other folks in the school need to work together and understand the whole student when they're issuing out these grants, and to also be able to provide long-term resources or information to other resources to the student. Because if a student is coming because they need rent money, there's likely a larger problem there. Maybe they don't have a job or something else has occurred for them to need money to pay a whole month's worth of rent. But that is a program that we have in our office. We understand that one of the things that schools are starting to look at, given the pandemic and distance learning, is how do we better support students who are finding issues accessing technology. So that is not necessarily a new issue, but it's an issue that has been highlighted due to the pandemic, the information gap and the technology gap. So that is something we're assessing in our office as well. I will kind of transition here and kind of talk about two things now. Some of the barriers that were mentioned during that financial aid call translates into some of the tips and things that were talked about on the other call about how to make sure students are successful. And it wasn't just that call, it was also the call where we had, we were focused on international immigrant and DACA students as well. This has kind of been a theme, is communication, communicating to students and communicating to students who belong to underrepresented groups or marginalized groups, and how do you communicate with those students properly and understanding these scenarios and situations they all are facing and accommodating that. One of the tips that was provided, I think it was from Megan Flores of our office, is that it was a call to action for students, and we don't want to put all the burden on students, but understanding that it's one of the realities is that a student needs to find that individual in the institution that they're comfortable with, ask questions, seek help, seek resources. Also, for the students to understand that your tuition dollars are paying for these administrators. There's a myriad of services that schools offer that you are allowed to access, and to look and find out what those resources are is very important. Our office provides some information on resources, but also your individual colleges also provide that information. One of the things that Dr. Shepard from State Institution Student Services had mentioned that if there was a question about if a student has COVID, what are their options? And he mentioned that there are policies and procedures in place for students to get refunds, and understanding that not all students are going to go and find that policy and procedure, but each individual campus's business office knows that information, knows how to walk the students through getting or applying and getting the information they need. So that students need to understand that there are resources available to them, and the schools are starting to try to do their best in communicating out more readily what those processes are, understanding that it's not easy for a student to constantly access large policies and procedures. So someone to explain that to them is what the schools are trying to elevate and do better. Another thing that was mentioned is that, and this is kind of for administrators and people that work directly with students, is to be mindful of sharing resources, mindful of the students that you work with, and that the typical non-traditional student is now our traditional student, or becoming our traditional student, and understanding that there are many gaps in resources and gaps in services. And I think a student had mentioned that while I understand that schools are offering services in a variety of ways, for example, Men's State is still allowing for writing labs and tutoring. They have made adjustments, just kind of hybrid models where there's some utilizing Zoom and Teams and social media and virtual town halls and things of that nature to connect with students. But understanding, and I think from a faculty standpoint or a professor standpoint, that technology, and even we've noticed that here in our agency working from home is sometimes a barrier. And if a storm happens in my area, sometimes my Wi-Fi connection drops. And circling back with that student, whether it's individually via email, not all the time does a mass form of communication work for the students that you're communicating with or working with. So being mindful of that and being mindful of sharing resources across the board. And for our office, another thing that was pointed out is understanding that organizations and institutions and entities do not have the same amount of resources, and figuring out better new ways to share resources and do more cross-agency, entity, organization, institutional collaboration to elevate some of those best practices and to do what we can to support institutions across the board to do better support for students. So that is kind of a summary of kind of a lot of things that were talked about, and I know I apologize if I talked fast, but I just wanted to touch base on some of those things. One more thing that I'd like to highlight before I pass it over to Marcio, actually two things. One thing is something a student said on one of our race and equity calls, is how is a student supposed to hold, or how are we supposed to hold institutions accountable when we don't know what to hold them accountable for? And to that, I say this is where it's very important that folks are utilizing and looking into reports and information that is provided on our website. For example, the attainment goal. With that, we do a report, Educating the Future, and in that report, you can see the shortfalls by race and ethnicity when it comes to obtaining post-secondary education. And we are looking into seeing if we could, one of the suggestions is having all the colleges in Minnesota posting that information or posting the attainment goal itself, so students are aware that this is something that exists and there's work being done around it to help hold everybody involved accountable. The other thing I'd like to mention, and I know at the later in the call, Kat is going to be talking more about COVID and health and returning to campus, that next Tuesday, I think September 1st, the Senate Higher Education Committee is going to be having an informational hearing with all the higher ed institution sectors on their plans and where their status and everything that's happening with COVID. So just so you all are aware, that's something that will be going on, so you can probably get more information on each system and what they're doing. And that's kind of all I had to say for now, and I think I'll pass it over to Marcio.
Thank you, Nikki. Appreciate all the information that you shared. I just want to, some of the times on the call, we have some subject matter or topics that are introduced by guests, by some of our guest presenters that need more explanation or to have more conversation about. And so as we do kind of our rewind of some of the information that is brought forth, I wanted to bring back something that was brought up on the call last week. And so in our last session, Dr. Peterson from Nekey was talking about more along the lines of systemic racism and its role in perpetuating barriers that persist for immigrant students. And we would say really these barriers are created and persist or create inequities for all students, and especially those students from Black, Indigenous, that identify as Black or Indigenous or people of color. The concept he introduced was called the 4 levels of racism, and this concept was developed in collaboration with Showing Up for Racial Justice Minnesota, and by research from Race Forward, and the researcher's name was Terry Keller, so I went and took a look at that. Showing Up for Racial Justice is a national network of groups of individuals working to undermine white supremacy and to work for racial justice. Through community organizing, mobilizing, and education, Showing Up for Racial Justice moves white people to act as part of a multiracial majority for justice, with passion and accountability. I think, and that's a national organization. There's also a Minnesota chapter, and this construct came out of the work of that Minnesota chapter. And just a little background on Race Forward. Race Forward is a national multiracial organization that has been generating the awareness, solutions, and leadership required to achieve racial justice. They offer research, training, tools, and they also offer a multi-generational conference called Facing Race, which I heard is excellent, but probably won't be held this year due to COVID. So we'll have to keep our fingers crossed for future opportunities to attend something like that. And Race Forward focuses on systemic racism to move the conversation on race forward, so to keep the conversation out there, to be able to have constructive conversations about race and systemic racism, most importantly. So Dr. Peterson shared with us the construct, the 4 levels of racism. And this construct challenges the notion that racism is mostly interpersonal. It looks at interpersonal racism as just a symptom of systemic racism. So it says that, interpersonal racism is a symptom or a fundamental of a more fundamental system of racism, an array of cultural norms, institutional policies, and practices that routinely produce racial inequities, outcomes, often without individual intent or malice. And so it shows you that this is kind of part of a larger system that's working against those persons who are being oppressed. This construct looks at the racism on two levels. So there's a micro level and a macro level. And so he was talking about the micro level, which looks at individual racism. And that's the beliefs, attitudes, and actions of individuals that support or perpetuate racism. Individual racism can occur at both an unconscious, which is the implicit bias, or conscious level, which can be explicit bias, and can be both active and passive. And some of the examples I give for that is maybe saying a racist joke, or just simply believing that inherent superiority of whites or any other racial group. And then it talks about interpersonal racism in the micro level as well. And that is a bias that occurs when individuals interact with others and their personal racial belief affects their public interaction. Mostly one-on-one, but this could be in a group as well when you're looking at interpersonal relationships and how that happens and how the oppression goes forward because of their racist beliefs. And once again, those could also be passive or active. It also looks at it from a macro level, and so the system and how these things work together. So when it talks about structural or systematic racism or institutional racism, systematic or institutional racism, and when it looks at that, it talks about the network of institutional structures, policies, and practices that create advantages and benefits for whites, and discrimination, oppression, and disadvantages for people from targeted populations or those from a non-dominant culture. These advantages that are created for whites are often looked at as being rights. So it's a right or a privilege. So that's where you will hear the phrase white privilege being spoken of. So when these advantages are created by the system, it's often invisible to those who have access to it because they're part of the privileged group who have access to that, and they never are aware or are not keenly aware that these rights or opportunities are not offered or available for other individuals or other groups who don't look like them. And the last part of that concept was structural racism. And so this involves the cumulative and compounding effects of an array of societal factors, including history, culture, ideology, and interactions of institutions and policies that systematically privilege white people and disadvantage people of color. And this can be seen in what we talk about when we say that the education system is a system that is currently built to continue to perpetuate the inequities that it currently produces. When we talk about our attainment goal and our attainment gaps and our achievement gaps, it's because of the structure that the education system is built on that allows it to continue to compound that or increase that, because we're not stepping in and taking those things that are creating the barriers, removing those, and making sure that those that are disadvantages are now being part of a group that is receiving those things that would help them achieve or excel in those instances. So I thought that was a really important construct. He wasn't able to kind of expound on it. He did just kind of briefly put it out there so we would know some things. So I really thought it was important, especially when we talk about it from the educational lens. When we look at, as I said, the racial disparity in educational attainment and achievement, we have to know that these things are at play, and we have to call those things out, and we have to look for the resources that allow us to be able to challenge to challenge the status quo, one, and then be accountable for changing the status quo, and then also challenging those who are in power, those who find themselves in an influential space, to use some of the same tools to achieve racial equity or racial justice in most cases in not only education but in every other vocation in the state of Minnesota as well. So that's all I want to share. If anybody wants to have more discussion about that, you can definitely put that information and put questions in the chat. And with that said, I want to pass it on to Kat, who's going to talk a little bit more about returning to campus for students.
All right, thank you, Marcio. And good morning, everyone. My name is Kat Klima. I'm the Outreach and Communications Coordinator here at the Office of Higher Education. Thank you so much for joining us today. And like Marcio said, I'm going to talk a little bit today about returning to campus safely. So I don't know if you've heard this tagline or this phrase, but all of it can essentially be reduced to this idea of stay low before you go. And so what we know is that Minnesota needs a strong higher education sector that supports its students and communities in returning to on-campus instruction at our colleges and universities. This must be balanced with a need for everyone to take steps to reduce the spread of the coronavirus and minimize infecting people, especially if they're high risk for getting sick. So there are 4 recommendations from the Minnesota Department of Health that I'd like to go over that we need students to consider before coming to campus. The first one is to stay home for 14 days before coming to campus. Plan to stay home and interact only with the people that you live with for at least 14 days. If you've been exposed to the coronavirus and don't know it, which can be likely, this will help to ensure that you don't spread it once you're at campus. The second tip is to take safety precautions when gathering. So make sure that you limit gatherings to small groups and gather outdoors whenever possible. Stay 6 feet away from anyone you do not live with and wear a mask, especially if social distancing is difficult. The third recommendation is to avoid high-risk situations. So that means staying away from crowded bars, events, parties, and other situations that would put you at risk of contracting COVID-19. And the fourth and final recommendation is to follow school guidelines on masking and social distancing. So you need to learn your school-specific rules related to wearing your mask and social distancing. Minnesota colleges and universities are following and tailoring state guidelines to college settings to support social distancing and masking, which we know helps slow the spread of the coronavirus. And so really what you need to take away from that last one is that each school is different. So in order to make sure that you keep yourself safe, your family safe, your friends, and your fellow students safe is to make sure that you go on to your college's specific website and find out their recommendations. So again, all of the recommendations from the Department of Health can be summarized into stay low before you go. Make sure you wear a mask, stay home for 14 days, 2 weeks, stay 6 feet away from people, and avoid high-risk situations. And again, this is from the Minnesota Department of Health and the Institute of Higher Education, and that is what I have. Thank you.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Kat. I want to make sure that everyone knows that we are opening up the chat for any questions that folks might have that are on the call today. If you have a question, just go ahead and drop it in the chat. As Nikki said earlier, we may not be able to answer all questions, but we'll try to answer as many as we can. And so don't see any questions in the chat currently. So does anyone have any questions about anything they've heard or anything we've said, or want to elaborate on a discussion topic you heard, whether it's around the resources that Nikki talked about, or the return to campus, which Kat just spoke about, or the construct, which I introduced for 4 levels of racism. Just go ahead and drop your question in the chat.
I'm wondering, do we have the ability, if someone wanted to say, I have but they would rather speak the question, we do that as well.
I can certainly do that, Nikki. That would mean unmuting everyone's lines like that one time. And then we heard essentially people having conversations and other things.
Oh, I was saying they would let us chat that they had a question.
Oh, okay.
Which that was. Yeah.
Good morning again. This is Winnie. I'm wondering, while we're waiting for questions, if someone from the public engagement team can just kind of give us the upcoming schedule and topics.
Yep, I can do that, Winnie. So this is Kat again. And so this is getting into some of my updates, but it is important to note that we are switching from WebEx training, which is just, one-click register once, you're going to use the same login information for every call. We are no longer going to be using that, and we're going to be switching to WebEx events. And so with that, you do click a link, but it is specific to that call. And so we're switching that, and we're starting to use WebEx events starting Wednesday, September 16th. And that topic is going to be applying to college during COVID-19. And so we've got a really stellar lineup of panelists so far. We have Derek Francis, who's the lead counselor at Minneapolis Public Schools. We've got Brian Jones, who's the director of admissions at Minnesota State University Mankato. And we also have Miguel Oliver, who is a multicultural admissions representative at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. So that is our first WebEx event public engagement call coming up on Wednesday, September 16th. On Wednesday, September 30th, we're going to be covering the FAFSA. And so the FAFSA, as you know or maybe don't know, debuts on October 1st, so it's going to be just the day before. And then following that, we've got a panel discussion led by our very own Commissioner Dennis Olson on American Indian Affairs in higher education in the state of Minnesota, title pending. And then Marcio or Nikki, what am I missing, or is that how far we've gotten so far?
Yeah, that's the schedule that we have currently, and then we're developing subject matter for November and December, making sure that we're taking on hot button topics as well and bringing back information that people might find helpful.
So while we're waiting, if you don't have questions or anything, you can also drop in the chat box any topics or subjects you feel should be discussed as well. That's something you can do as well. In addition, something that I didn't mention before was making sure that students get the resources for all their needs, like basic needs. I know I mentioned the emergency assistance grant, but I know Men's State is continuing to provide those services and resources. So something that we're trying to do as well is making sure our students know where they can access food shelves and things of that nature. And I think on our previous call, Odell from the Department of Human Rights mentioned that their food shelves are available to everyone, or identification needs to be provided for them to access it. And there is the option to have specific food shelves to deliver. So things of that nature, and then transportation needs and other basic needs, making sure students are aware of those services, especially now, but also understanding that I keep saying this, but students are whole people and not just students going to school. And very much like K-12, they need their basic needs serviced in order to do their best academically. So I just want to mention that.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nikki, for bringing that back. I also want to just reiterate those organizations that are doing the work here that you could use as a resource. As I mentioned, Race Forward is an organization that helped develop that construct, or research from that helped develop that construct. And their website is raceforward.org. And then if you want to connect with the local chapter of Showing Up for Racial Justice, their website is showingupforracialjustice.org. And both of those websites have helpful information if you're looking to do any type of racial conversations or anti-racist work with your organization.
All right, I'm not seeing any questions. So, Kat, if you had additional things you wanted to do to close out the call, I think you might be okay to do that unless you had some questions coming through the form. One of the other things before Kat, you go ahead and speak, I just want to encourage everyone to let people know about these calls, let people know that there's a space for them to enter in comments and questions to us. We are encouraging it. We want to be more engaged. We want feedback. So I just want to emphasize those pieces.
Thanks, Nikki. I guess the only thing that I can recommend is we have been at the Office of Higher Ed on our Twitter and Facebook page. We have been promoting the Stay Low Before You Go recommendations for college students. So for those of you on the line who have social media accounts, please follow us, number one. But number two, if you could retweet or share any of the posts that we have about the Lay Low Before You Go recommendations around returning to campus in person, that would be really helpful, just getting the word out. But other than that, I did cover some of the updates I had already, which was we're going to take a break because it is going to be Labor Day soon, hard to believe. Especially without the state fair, as Minnesota's last hurrah. But we're going to be taking a break because of the holiday and also to get everyone acclimated into the new academic school year. And so we will be returning with our public engagement calls on Wednesday, September 16th at 10 a.m. with that applying to college during the coronavirus or during COVID, like I mentioned earlier. And again, we will be switching from WebEx training to WebEx events. And so we don't have that specific link set up yet. We're still testing it out. It will be working and ready to go, and we will let you know well in advance what those links are. And we are actually, as per the request of some of the people on this call, we're going to be posting at least a few of these calls in advance so that you can share it with your network, right? And so we're going to have links for the WebEx events for the Applying to College During COVID-19, the FAFSA, and the American Indian in Higher Education panel discussion. So we will have those. You can share them. They will also be linked into our newsletters that come out through GovDelivery. And just a reminder, if you do, which I hope that you do, get those emails or newsletters from GovDelivery. They're safe. You can open them. They are from us. I just wanted to make sure because we did switch from using just regular Outlook email to GovDelivery. So I just wanted to make that reminder. So we've got that break. We've got the WebEx training to events. And then again, the topic is applying to college during COVID-19 on Wednesday, September 16th. And with that, again, we thank you so much for taking time to come in and listen to us. And I hope you are enjoying these last few days of summer we have before the start of the school year. And we'll see you in a few weeks. Thank you so much.